Okay. I'm going to call it, so I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Monday, October 25th to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we have guests this evening. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to welcome our guests from the Thriving Youth Task Force, Emily Larkin and Shelley Sheridan, to give us, the Board of Selectmen, a presentation of the asset survey results. I know you rolled it out at Middlesex last week, but thank you so much for coming here to share this with the Board of Selectmen. It really is important for us to hear the survey results because the stuff that you capture in that survey really affects the whole community, and the Board of Selectmen would like to be a partner in trying to help address the concerns that are highlighted by the survey results. So without further ado, welcome.
Shelley Sheridan, thank you for having us, and Emily's going to speak after me.
Okay.
So yes, as you mentioned, we presented to the Board of Ed sort of a short version of this, and then we rolled it out to the community in person at Middlesex last week and to over 190-ish people over Zoom. So we have about 15 minutes. There's a lot more data than that, but I'll try to hit the highlights, and then I don't know at the end if you do Q&A or not, but we're open
Sure,
to that.
yes.
Okay. So Shelley Sheridan, I'm a parent in town. I'm a volunteer, and I'm on the board. And Emily is an employee and is the director, or program director at Thriving Youth. So I think many of you have some of the history, but we've done the survey many times, and our task force convenes all of the community type people in town into one room a few times a year, I guess once a quarter or something like that. And we try to address the needs of our youth. So that's really our mission. And tonight we're going to share what we do every 3 years, which is survey our 7th through 12th graders and try to understand what is going on with them. This survey, we specifically, had the impact of COVID, and we have a good understanding of the substance use in town, and also the mental health of our students. So as I mentioned, there's a coalition of lots of wonderful people in town and our county, really, that serve our youth. And we all come together and try to use this information to provide programming and feedback to the schools so that we can support them in what they need to do. We were recently awarded a 5-year grant to be able to fund and do some of these things. So we really want to bring everyone together and do the best for our kids. Just a quick thank you to everyone who helped us put this together. It was a lot of work. Shelley Scogan couldn't be here tonight, but she and I were co-chairs and worked really closely with Emily and this whole committee, including Sarah. Thank you. And Alicia's also a town employee and has worked a lot with us. Wonderful. So a bit of history. It says the 5th iteration of the survey. Like I said, we do 7th through 12th grade, which is sort of interesting because you're capturing kind of when they're still a little innocent and then up through when their graduation. We did have a parent survey. It didn't have quite enough respondents, so tonight we're just going to be speaking about what the students responded. And just for the intents and purposes, we have broken it into male and female. We did give parents the option of opting out, and we did have some percentage of kids that chose to not answer, shared, either were non-binary, chose not to share that. So just that data is very small, so it's not just statistically included, but we wanted everyone to know that it was addressed. So what was different this year? This is usually Mitch Dickey's slide. He was our amazing statistician and really instrumental in taking this survey results to the next level. So in the past, we reported X did this and Y did this, and it was very useful, but this year we really brought it to another level where we were able to use really AI to make sense of all the numbers and what did it really mean and what were the characteristics of certain students in certain clusters. So we were able to do predictive analysis and machine learning. Like, he could go into a lot of detail, but we're so grateful for his work because it really gave us more data to really work with for programming and things. So a few just highlights. I mentioned this was given in February of 2021, so in the middle of COVID and lockdown. So just something to keep in mind. And we really focused on substance use and mental health. And we're really excited because it was a lot more information in all of this data mining to find out why students were behaving certain ways. So instead of, again, just the numbers, we could use the why to take action. So with this data analysis, we're able to put kids and the students into clusters, we called them. Category is another way to use. So basically they answered many questions and we were able to put them into these categories. So students who are completely substance-free, students who only drink alcohol, but really not that much and not that often, students that were moderate users, so they were drinking frequently and they were also using other substances, and then really a heavy use category. So they were drinking often, they were drinking a lot, and they were doing lots of different things. And what do we learn from this is really the biggest predictor of use was grade or age. So if you look all the way to the left where the 7th and 8th graders are, there's really not much use, which probably most of us would think that makes sense. And then in 9th to 10th grade, it starts to tick up. And then really by 11th and 12th grade, while we're happy there's 53% who are self-reporting substance-free, there's a big subset here of kids that we need, to address. The moderate use and heavy use, getting pretty high numbers that we need to look at. So the most common substance is alcohol. Again, I don't think that's a surprise, everyone, but that was also self-reported. As I mentioned, as they got older, either it was more socially acceptable and parents were more relaxed, things really increased. We had one piece, again, there was this machine learning, and we would have thought with COVID and people being isolated and sad and anxious that there would have been a big uptick of substance use, but that wasn't actually a big predictor in this case. Again, we could ask the analytic piece different things, and if you took out, if you added exposure to bullying, then it did change things. So there was a lot of different ways to look at it. If we look at the 11th and 12th graders, and there's 30% that are these sort of moderate to heavy users, we just picked out a few things to people. What does that mean? I mean, that means they're going out of their way to find alcohol in the next town over. They're playing drinking games. They're having hangovers. So there are some consequences to these actions that we're seeing. So we want to try to make sure that we, most are reporting that it was for fun, but we need to address this before it gets worse. So we did also take a look and want to kind of celebrate, like, who are the students that are reporting substance-free? And what are they doing? What are their characteristics that we could, use as models? So most of them just didn't want to, which we thought was really interesting. We thought it would be more maybe peer-driven or whatnot, but they didn't want to, and that their parents were strict. So we did dig into that in some focus groups and follow-on, and a lot of that was, they had very clear rules around their opinions about it and where they were. So we also saw that they were great at, they were resilient, and they were okay if people disapproved of them, things like that. They could handle it. So I should have mentioned, these are like individual sort of internal variables, and then the next slide is kind of the key takeaway, that parents are the biggest predictor in a way of them choosing to stay substance-free. So if they had clear, and not just, I kind of disapprove, if they were clear and strict and they knew where you were, it predicted much less use. So this was, as I wrap up, the key kind of takeaways. So we think, it would be really great moving forward if we can roll this type of information out and help parents set some clear rules and realize that they have a lot of impact on how their students will be choosing to use substances or not, while also keeping, the lines of communication open. They're kids, and, we're trying to grow the whole human. So we're hoping to follow up with all of that. So that was the substance use piece. Turn it over to Emily for the mental health. Yes.
Before you leave, these are reports are self-reporting.
Yes.
What are the chances of errors in self-reporting?
Good question. It's possible. We had over 2,000 students. So depending on what you mean by error, like they clicked the wrong.
No, they would deny that they were using, or they,
Oh, sure.
they want to make themselves seem more aggressive.
Right. Or kids saying they've done something and they haven't. I'm sure that's there. That's a good question. I don't know. How does Mitch answer that?
Should I maybe say it into the microphone?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Okay. This is for the adults in the room only, but there are some tricks within the survey that would illuminate if a student, for example, was saying, I have done every single drug in this list. There may be a drug that's not a real drug. So it would kind of catch students who are perhaps being intentionally not accurate. And we also do a really thorough data cleaning process. And usually about 50 to 100 surveys are thrown out for just that reason. For example, 7th grade boys who are reporting drinking and driving, we know that's not accurate. So there's a very thorough process to ensure the data is reliable.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
When you say moderate to heavy drinking, what quantity is that?
That's a great question. I can maybe even
Does it say it in there?
go back to that slide.
I don't think so.
So here it's not as descriptive. Moderate students who are drinking frequently and using other substances, heavy use students who are drinking heavily and frequently. The CDC defines binge drinking for men as 5 or more drinks in 2 hours, and for women 4 or more drinks in 2 hours. So my hunch is, Mitch was the one who described these categories, is heavily would be at least binge drinking.
And that would be the same for children? Okay,
Right.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, great question. So I will be taking us through the student mental health findings. Again, this will be a very brief overview, but I think it's certainly top of mind for a lot of us right now. So just the way Shelley explained our substance use categories, we developed these 5 mental health categories based on students' responses to many different questions. And I think it's important to note that these questions are not diagnostic questions. We're not saying these students meet the clinical criteria for anxiety, depression, et cetera. But it gives us a sense of how students are feeling. We asked in the past 30 days, are you feeling anxious, quite sad or depressed, lonely? How do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about your future? Those are the questions that helped us form these clusters, just to give you a sense of that. So here you'll see we've got 31% of students in the thriving category, 23 in the okay category, and then the rest of the students are in anxious, vulnerable, and distressed categories, which is very concerning. And as we looked at these 5 categories, a gender composition certainly stood out. You can see here that students identifying as male are overrepresented in the thriving and okay categories, and students identifying as female are much more likely to be in the vulnerable and distressed categories. So that was certainly a noteworthy takeaway. This was not flat among gender, really clear differences. And when we dug a little deeper into the female student findings, a key takeaway was that girls or female students were reporting more social stress, specifically related to social media, which I'm sure is surprising no one as it's part of such a huge national conversation right now. And male students reported more academic stress. So that was a difference that I think merits even more exploration. Now, when we looked at the students who were thriving, that 31% overall, just the way we did for our substance-free students, we analyzed what do they have in common? What are those factors that are predicting good mental health? The number 1 factor was that students report feeling valued. The second was that they report feeling in control of their life and their future. And the third was that they feel that they are developing a sense of purpose in their lives, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And I'll let you read the rest of these just to respect everyone's time. But those are really important takeaways for anyone in town who cares about youth, whether a parent, a coach, a teacher.
We think there are a lot of ways we can reinforce those messages for students. And then certainly family variables were really important in terms of mental health. Quality time as a family, students perceiving what the advice their parents gives them is helpful. Parents reinforcing strong messages around pro-social behavior, messages against lying, cheating, stealing. Those were really predictive of good mental health for students. Now, we also asked students about the sources of stress and pressure in their lives. This was the first time we asked students these questions, so unfortunately we can't compare to prior years, but they sent us a message loud and clear. Students as young as 7th grade are reporting high degree of stress about grades, getting into a good college. 10th and 11th graders in particular were very stressed about standardized testing. Meeting my parents' expectations was a significant source of stress across all grades. And then finally, excelling in sports and COVID-related losses topped the charts in terms of what students are feeling stressed about. So that was a really important takeaway for us to understand. And then I won't repeat this slide just because we're keeping it short and sweet tonight, but I do want to highlight in closing that our goal as the Thriving Youth Task Force is not just to collect this data, but to really respond to it in meaningful ways. And since 2018, our last survey, we've put together these programs, a few snapshots highlighted here, in hopes of giving parents reliable information, actionable takeaways, as they seek to navigate a really challenging time to be raising teens. And we also have a new community calendar on the task force's website highlighting all of our partners' work and upcoming events. So we wanted to highlight that quickly. And, one more slide. We also have an upcoming event as it relates to the stress and pressure data. We're going to be bringing Michael Thompson to Darien for an in-person event. He'll be discussing his book, The Pressured Child. So that will be in person and on Zoom for anyone who's interested. And in closing, Jamie so thoughtfully asked us to bring some ideas for ways the task force can collaborate with the town. And so we wanted to just highlight a few wonderful collaborations that are already happening and then share a few ideas for the future. So the first is we are thrilled with the town representation on the task force. You'll see here we have Board of Selectmen, Sarah, the Police Department, Youth Commission, Health Department, and Human Services. We are so grateful that every meeting these partners are at the table, and especially Alicia with the Youth Commission and Sarah with the Board of Selectmen were a key part of working on the survey committee doing this analysis. So they don't just show up for meetings, but they're doing work outside of that, and we're really grateful. The second thing I'd love to highlight is not just the support of this survey, but the town has supported key TYTF programs. Just even this year, Alicia and the Youth Commission were a key partner for bringing Chris Heron to Darien in February. So that's just one example of the town really coming alongside these efforts. And then finally, we wanted to highlight, as Shelley mentioned, we received funding from the CDC, a 5-year drug-free communities grant. And that's just starting this month. We haven't even been onboarded quite yet by the CDC, but we think there will be a lot of opportunities as that grant gets up and running for collaboration with the town. So I wish we had a little more information, but there's more to come there for sure. And we just added a few other bullets on this slide, maybe for offline conversations about possible partnerships or collaborations. So I hope we are within our time. I want to be mindful of other presentations tonight, but we'd love to answer any questions that have come to mind.
Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of data behind this. I think I have a couple questions, so I'll just give them to you and then see where it goes. I'm assuming that you do sort of a deep dive analysis on trends over the 5 surveys that you've given. So I'd love to hear some, general insight on, are we moving the dial on certain things? Because you guys have been doing great work for a long time. So that's my number 1 question. My number 2 question is, are there things that you would like to survey for that you don't or you're not allowed to survey for? That's number 2. And then last but not least, the protective factors, I'm really interested in those. And as we in a community try and decide what falls under the responsibility of parents and what might fall to the responsibility of the schools to help address? You know, is that something that you guys will be looking at and working on?
Great questions. So I can start with the trend question.
Yep.
That's an important one. So I think we may have taken this out
In the interest of time,
for brevity. But we do have, if anyone wants to scan the QR code, you can go online, and this is in our presentation from last week. We are happy to report, but we're not getting too comfortable with this, that substance use is on the decline from 2014 to 18 to 21. However, we are aware that there is a significant COVID effect. The decrease was so dramatic in 2021 that certainly we're not taking credit and expecting that to remain going forward. So the substance use trends are moving in the right direction. This is the first year we've surveyed with those specific mental health questions, so this was really baseline data that we were gathering. So I can't speak to that. I do think probably the most encouraging needle that we see moving is as it relates to our parent surveys. We began surveying parents in 2016, 18, and then again in 2021. And we were capturing about 30 to 35% of Darien parents, which made it statistically significant enough in 2016 and 18. And what was really encouraging about those data sets is we saw a dramatic increase in parents from 2016 to 18 who were initiating conversations with their children about substance use, who were not allowing people to use substances in their home, parents allowing teens, who were setting clear rules and boundaries for the first time, especially with 11th and 12th grade students, which is, as you can see, when use really spikes. So we are really encouraged about that. That's probably our most encouraging data set in terms of kind of attitudes and behaviors changing over time. But we are encouraged to see student use decreasing. We just want to keep focused there because we know there probably is already an increase as students are more spending time with peers and we're not in as much of a lockdown mode. So that was your first question. Remind me of your second. I'm so sorry.
Yep. I think that I'll just move on to the one that's of most importance to me, and that is the protective factors, looking at the shared responsibility of the community versus family and parents. Trying to identify what should be a focus of the schools and what should be a clear focus of families and parents.
Yes, that's a great question. And I wish Scott McCarthy joined us. He's the director of special education and climate with the Darien Public Schools. He joined us on the 20th for our panel, and so was able to speak from the school's perspective. He's taking this data back to his climate teams and working on integrating it in teacher training and as it relates to bullying and all the school climate issues. So the school is absolutely taking this data and running with it kind of in their lane. And we've talked about partnerships as the task force is a little more along the lines of educating parents and bringing the community together around these important issues. And we certainly want to partner as we can, but we do feel confident the school was an integral part of even administrating the survey, and they really want to take this and use it in their lane as educators. So we feel encouraged by that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions for Emily and Shelley? You know all this.
Yeah.
Great.
Sarah's very well versed.
Yeah.
All of this data.
David, Kip, Monica?
I was actually struck by some of the things, like one of the, I think it was the third highest one for substance abuse was for thriving, for not using was good to deal with frustration. When I look at the top three for thriving mental health, it's valued in control and sense of purpose. And to me, those four are pretty close together in terms of what they are. So are there I'm not familiar with the things that the school is doing, and it sounds like the last comment is you guys are gathering the data, working with the parents and the town more, but how do we build those attributes in the kids, right? Because it seems to me that the world is only going to become faster, more hectic, more difficult, and building the skill set to deal with those things will probably be the most useful thing of all the data that you collect.
Absolutely.
So how does that happen?
how do we help instill,
Yeah,
build
you-
those skills in
yeah.
students? Well, I think, and again, if Scott was here, he would do a much better job than I would talking about this, but I know they are rolling out a robust social emotional curriculum in the school, so I think that's one way that the school's responding. I know organizations like the Dpw, I was just talking with someone outside about programs like Choose Love that are about building those social emotional competencies and self-regulation, mindfulness, all these great skills that kids need. I know the community fund where I work has some wonderful student groups all about giving back and philanthropy, which I see a direct line to students feeling a sense of purpose when they're giving back to others. I think tons of other task force partners, the YMCA, I mean, there are so many other groups that do provide programs for teens that I think build those assets. But I think we can always use more of those programs because certainly, the students are telling us they need it, and this is a really tough time to be an adolescent, I think.
What do you think about the thought that under the male side it was overrepresented on the private for mental health?
Yeah.
What do you think of what do you think of the reason for that is?
That's a great question. I mean, Mitch, our psychologist, would probably do a better job creating a hypothesis around that. I almost don't even want to make something up just because I wouldn't want to be wrong. but I think that's a good question. I mean, we're happy to see that we have so many boys represented in that category, but I think that would require a little more exploration.
Well, being on that side of the equation, I might offer to you that young men encouraged to be in touch with their emotional sense and where they are from an emotional standpoint. In fact, it's considered a great weakness. And if you display any emotional sensitivity, it's considered highly negative.
Absolutely. And Georgette, who is our presenter on the 20th, shared with this slide that there's some really incredible body of research around resilience, and that boys who are able to kind of access more of that emotional intelligence, self-awareness, are so much more resilient. It's such a protective factor, but our culture is certainly not leading them in that direction.
Okay, any other questions for Emily? Yes, Monica.
I have a pretty easy one. Who takes these surveys? And is it possible that the seventh grader will then take it in 10th grade?
Yes, so students are surveyed every 3 years, every 7th through 12th grader,
Every student, okay.
unless their parent opts them out. I think maybe we had
Alright.
3 or 4 of those.
Thank you, did not understand that, thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you so much for coming to share the information with us, and please keep the ideas coming on how the town, the Board of Selectmen can partner with you going forward.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. Okay, our next presentation, I'm hoping that Marley Hayes and Nobu Miki are outside.
They are.
Great. We'll just, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming. Hi, Marley. How are you? Hi, how are you?
I have show and tell.
Terrific, thank you.
We're not high tech.
Hi. Are not all these folks with you? Is this whole group with you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Terrific.
Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you very much for coming tonight, Marley and Nobu. I was so inspired by the information you shared with me at the art festival about Darien United. I feel that at this particular time it's a really, really important initiative, so I wanted us all to learn more about it and have the benefit of TV 79 covering this so the entire public can hear about your efforts.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you all of you for your service too. We are excited to be here and have the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about Darien United. I gave you our postcard, which has our mission statement on it. So I won't reread, well, I will reread that for those of you at home. Darien United is a group of 5 organizations at this point who have come together to really unite our town in a common cause of inclusivity, diversity, awareness, and welcoming. And we developed a mission statement by doing research of multiple towns throughout the country who are heavy into doing this work and how they created their sort of town values, if you will, which is something we've talked about. And our mission statement for Darien United is, Darien United is a grassroots initiative conceived and inspired by local artist, activist, and founding member of Minority Voices, Nobu Miki. It is made up of Darien residents and local leaders who commit to creating and supporting a welcoming community. We are a community that respects and encourages contributions of all people and all our beautiful variety of race, ethnicity, language, mental and physical ability, military status, and immigration status. Being part of Darien United, we commit to upholding these values within our town, organizations, and businesses as both aspirational and operational guideposts in our everyday practices and priorities. The genesis of Darien United was Nobu reaching out to many of us in this room because of the work we are already doing in the space of diversity and inclusivity, and because of our reach throughout the community. We all have different capacity to reach members of the community. So it was Nobu's feeling, and I'm speaking on her behalf, that if all of us work together, we might be able to really create some change in this town that now more than ever we need. So our goal really is to work together to get members, be it organizations or individuals, to sign a pledge. I have given you the pledge that we've created, and I will note that we're pretty careful to not use what we consider trigger words. The intention of Darien United is to be non-political, non-judgmental, and welcoming to everybody who joins us. So we're very thoughtful in the word selections that we used. We're very much in the beginning stages. Our real goal is to get everybody in town and every organization to sign on to Darien United and take the pledge. And by doing so, they'll uphold the values, which we stated in the mission statement. But also we hope to create really a call to action, which we don't have clearly defined yet because we're so new. But the initial goal is for us to create opportunities for people to come together and create safe spaces, be it in a store, a business, a home, etc., and hopefully create different programs and events where we can celebrate differences in diversity, diverse thinking, ways of life, color of skin, etc. And we have our eyes sort of set on things like food festivals and music festivals where we can really learn about and celebrate different cultures. So really, that's the whole idea. And our biggest goal, and you're providing us this opportunity, is for the town to really sign on and support this initiative. We understand that there are issues with politics, et cetera, that get in the way of many things. But by us creating our own organization with the town as a supporter, we feel like we can really begin to make some change in town. So, and I am remiss by not introducing our partners here. Nobu has already been introduced, but we have Kira Parrott, the Executive Director of the Library, Karen Ford, Director of Development at the YMCA. Their Executive Director is at a board meeting tonight, so she could not be here. And Nancy Coughlin, Executive Director of Person to Person. So I think you'll see by the organizations who've come together, we have some power to make some positive change.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really love this, and yeah, I just had an opportunity to scan your pledge. It's really very well worded. I'm curious for the organizations that are here in support of Darien United. Did your boards look at this, and did they take a vote to support the pledge, or did they just do that individually?
I can speak for the Y. In fact, tonight at the board meeting, we're talking about Darien United. It's been pretty much staff-driven for now, but we are in the process of, and I've been pushing a little bit to internally for us to create a diversity and inclusion committee within the walls of of the Darien YMCA to make sure that everything that we're doing currently is inclusive and welcoming to everybody to our facility. But our board also, some of the members of the board I've spoken with, they say this is a very important topic, we need to bring it up, and so it is moving forward within the YMCA.
Thank you.
I can speak for person. Our board has been doing an awful lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion over the past year. We are part of Stanford Stands Against Racism, which is a very organized group. And at this point, when I the minute I learned about Darien United, I immediately picked up the phone and called Marley, and I said, I want to be involved. I want to be at the table. So we were not actually one of the original groups. We wanted to jump in really quickly, and our board will be taking this up at their next board meeting.
Terrific. Great.
So from the library perspective, the board was very supportive early on. I think when we had our mission statement articulated, which happened prior to the articulation of the pledge, but similar to the other organizations, the board has done a lot of work around equity, diversity, inclusion over the past about 2 years or so. And we are simultaneously working on an internal library mission statement that's specific to EDI values. So this sort of goes in tandem with a lot of work happening on the staff and board side of the library.
Thanks, Kira. Thank you.
The YWCA board has voted on this already, and they love the initiative and are grateful that we get to be a part of it.
Terrific. So I'll entertain questions to you from board members. Anybody? No?
Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Yeah, thank
All of
you.
Thank you.
One more.
Yes.
How can we help you?
I think really, and I'll let other members jump in, but I think really having your support and having Darien United front and center in the work that the town does within the community would be perfect. I think a lot of what happens within this community needs to be driven from the top down as well as the bottom up. And if our community members see that our town government has come together to support this umbrella organization and grassroots efforts, I think that will make a huge difference. I mean, ideally, I'd love to see the Darien United logo right on the front page of the town website.
Can I speak?
Yeah, of course.
As many of you might know, I have organized the outdoor art event for 6 years. From my experiences, to achieve this big goal, I think we need financial support from town when we organize a town-wide event like International Food Festival at the Weed Beach or new Oxridge Hunt Club, I don't know what new name. Yeah. The most difficult part of doing, organizing town-wide event is financial. I organized the art event almost all by myself and asking local businesses for donations. It's really challenging. So this is my idea, not officially our idea maybe, but I hope town of Darien also joined our umbrella, as Marie said. And when we, my concept is having each organization under big Darien United umbrella, and each organization will organize in diversity, inclusion events using their fund. But I think we need bigger event, town-wide event. Everybody can come and join without paying huge ticket. So to do that, I think we need, if town of Darien also joined under this big umbrella, and when we plan big event, I want a town also collaborate with us and make a financial help. Or another big problem when I organized the art event was insurance. I wanted to have the event in larger scale, but I needed to have insurance when I use town property or street.
Mm-hmm.
That's almost impossible. That was impossible for me to cover insurance. So if town coordinate with us for big event and consider cover the event under town's insurance, that would be so much easier. And I always think this town need more free event because I'm teaching at the Darien Senior Center. I see many seniors don't have so many opportunity to participate to fancy gala or fundraising event. I think we need town-wide big event to connect everybody. So that's my hope.
Thank you very much, Nobu. Appreciate that very much. So I want to thank you for coming tonight, for sharing the exciting information about Darien United. It's very well timed. I would like to ask for the folks that are continuing on the Board of Selectmen to take up this issue at a near future meeting and decide if the town can sign on to the pledge as a board. I think that would make a very important statement. I certainly support it as an individual and plan to sign your pledge, but you know, I'm your outgoing first selectman, so I think it will be to the new board to make that decision. And certainly if there are ideas for town-wide events, you know, we have to build a budget every year, and so anything that we contribute financially has to be budgeted for. So if there's something that you want to do and you want to bring an idea to the Board of Selectmen, that would be great. We build our budget. You know, we're actually starting to build our budget now. Often events are coordinated through the Parks and Recreation Department, so I would stay in good touch with Pam Geary and Lori Bora, the commission chair, for partnerships from the Parks and Rec Department. But I hope and encourage the next Board of Selectmen to join you in the effort. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for coming. Thank you for
Thank
coming,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Okay. Moving on for Selectmen's report, my last one. First, and most important, I want to congratulate Al Miller and the entire Bicentennial team, Museum of Darien, the Mather Homestead, the First Congregational Church, and our generous sponsors, the Darien Foundation, Baywater Properties, Crestwood Advisors, DR Bank, Hollow Tree Self-Storage, The Water's Edge at Giovanni's, William Ravis, Neil Houck Architects, Rand Insurance, Barrett Bookstore, Cross Private Client Insurance, the Darien Arts Center, Palmer's Market, and Moffley Media for their support of an absolutely extraordinary day of Darien's history coming to life. Heritage Day was outstanding. We're deeply grateful for the nearly 3 years of planning and execution of our bicentennial celebration. Very, very well done by all, and it's hard to believe that that won't happen again for another 100 years, so it was quite special. COVID update, vaccines for children ages 5 to 11 have been ordered by our local health department. Student clinics will be held in the Town Hall Gym on November 13th and 20th. For first doses and December 4th and 11th for second doses. The announcement to begin scheduling appointments will go out next week. Scheduling will be handled by the schools, and the local health department will run the clinics. I am curious, I want to follow up with David Knopf about students that are private school students and where they should register. Booster shots. The CDC has approved mixing of vaccines for booster shots. We recommend, though, that you confer with your doctor what booster vaccine is right for you. Our local health department has ordered Moderna vaccine, and booster clinics will be held in the town hall gym beginning November 9th from 9:30 to 3:30. Booster appointments for seniors can be scheduled now through the Health and Human Service Department. The general public who wishes to schedule a booster appointment must do so through the state's vaccine management system, VAMS. Seasonal flu shots will also be available at the same time you get your COVID booster. COVID booster shots are free, but seasonal flu shots are $40, payable by cash or check. As a follow-up to CIRCA's Resilient Connecticut Phase 2 report called Regional Adaptation, Resilience Opportunity Areas, Kate and I met with representatives from CIRCA on the 20th of October regarding engagement with the town of Darien for work in support of town-wide drainage and flood mitigation projects. In addition, we held a second meeting with Dewberry on October 22nd about engaging their services initially for FEMA grant writing assistance. Once we get their cost estimate, we will be holding a very brief virtual meeting to move an appropriation forward to procure their services. Last Thursday, we held our first organizing meeting with Frontier Fiber, which is a scheduled build-out in 2022 for the town of Darien. Frontier intends to bring fiber to 5,300 homes and businesses, and they'll provide up to 1 gigabyte of symmetrical upload and download speeds through their fiber service. More information about their service will be coming in early 2022, but that's fantastic news for fiber broadband connectivity in the town of Darien. Thought we could get past Election Day without another storm, but alas, that's not the case. A powerful autumn nor'easter is expected to impact our area beginning tonight and lasting until Wednesday morning. Flood watches have been issued for all of Connecticut. Peak storm activity is predicted to occur late Tuesday afternoon with rainfall rates of close to 1 inch per hour at times, along with tropical storm force winds. Storm track isn't certain, so impacts could be more or less severe. And Mark, you're welcome to give any updates you might have since I read that.
The forecast that the DPW has is very similar in scope.
Okay.
So it sounds like a margin of error. It could hit us hard, or it could be just another 12-hour rainstorm.
Okay, great. And as I mentioned briefly, we might hold a short virtual meeting to handle an appropriation for Dewberry, but also to address the fact that Kip is our Board of Selectmen representative to the Oxbridge Elementary School Building Committee. With him not serving on the Board of Selectmen anymore, we need to take an action to allow him to fill the vacancy by Michael Alfieri's retirement as a community at-large member, so that then the new Board of Selectmen can seat a Board of Selectmen member if they wish to the Oxbridge Building Committee. I know that I have a great desire to see Mr. Coons continue in his capacity as co-chairman of that committee. Can't get away yet. That's it for me. Kate?
I have nothing.
Okay. All right. Board liaison reports.
This time I'm ready for you.
Okay.
We did, the Blight Board did meet on October 20th. This meeting was scheduled specifically to determine to make an official blight status finding for 2 properties in town. The owners were notified in advance, invited to appear to discuss. Neither owner presented any representative at the meeting. In the first case, the board found to send an official notice of blight condition, which carries a 30-day window to remedy or fines commence to accrue at the $100 a day fine amount. In the second case, we learned that the property shows up in the various real estate apps as shown as pending for sale. So the blight review officer was going to check with the listing agent to verify it's true. Our experience has been is when they are listed for sale and they're in that condition, they typically get bought by a builder, knocked down, and the home goes up. So we are hopeful that will be the case, and I'm sure by the next meeting we'll have the answer to that question. So there's no further action on that one. We actually had an owner appear that was not scheduled for that meeting, but he was on one of our active cases. And he had taken some steps to remediate, but it wasn't fully remediated, so he wanted to learn what else he needed to do. So the board provided him with 3 specific tasks to remedy. Specifically, the concerns are that the driveway may not be passable, which raises safety concerns because he claims that he's residing in the property. So if someone's going to reside there, we need to have access to it. The front steps were fairly dilapidated, so if you get emergency personnel trying to enter the property, that could be problematic. And there was one additional item in terms of removing some other brush and debris. But he was interested, engaged, cooperative, so we're cautiously optimistic that we'll see some improvement there, and that one will move forward. We had one official case closed during this time period. It was a house that had been on the list for a long time. The house had been purchased by a builder, and the 90-day demolition period finally passed, and the house was demolished, and the electric stuff is all piped in, so we're expecting construction to begin imminently. So lastly, the board's practice had been a little, let's say, not consistent with regard to one thing, which was the board voted to establish a practice that once a property begins to accrue fines, at the end of 6 months, we would have town council establish, file for a lien to represent the updated accrued amount, and then every 6 months thereafter, update the lien amount, understanding. We did have, sorry, I forgot to write down here, we did actually have one property that had been in an accrual status that showed material improvements. The board voted to stop the accrual to see where we go going forward. So that leaves us with 8 active cases and 2 in warning status, which, since I've been on the board, is the lowest number that I've seen. So
Great.
That's pretty good.
Thank you. Sarah, anything else from Thriving Youth?
Nope,
No.
thank you.
Okay. Kip?
You got this, Kate?
I do.
Okay, the committee met at its regular scheduled meeting on October 14th and approved an additional payment of $2,409,000. We now got a total of approved spending of $19,422,677. The committee also approved a change in the design of the gymnasium wall that faces the parking lot. The new design is a more traditional approach by having 6 large windows in the wall instead of the clerestory windows along the top of the wall. This change will provide more light at the floor level and will soften what had been a relatively massive wall on the exterior. There should be minimal cost impact. And the ARB has actually given the new design its approval on October 19th. The delay in delivering roofing materials, which was 4 weeks, required a revision of our schedule. The Board of Education and the district have agreed with the committee's recommendation to move the completion of the academic wing to late May from mid-April. The revision means that the new academic wing will be first occupied in August of 2022, rather than moving everyone into this wing over the spring break in April of 2022. All parties were very relieved to have this extra time for moving in. End of report.
Terrific. Well done. Thank you, Kip. And Monica, I don't know if you want to just give a brief update about our first ARPA meeting?
Our first ARPA meeting was this morning, and we discussed the changing opportunities to deploy these funds, and we discussed the timing of the notification. And we will be meeting after the new Board of Selectmen meets to establish a chairman.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, moving on to new business. Discuss flood mitigation, drainage investigation action items. And we have a number of guests here this evening. We have Attorney Wayne Fox, who's going to help us understand the opportunities between storm water authorities and erosion control boards. We have Planning and Zoning Director Jeremy Ginsberg, DPW Director Ed Gentile, and Emergency Management Director Mark McEwen. The A-team when it comes to helping us with a path forward on drainage and flood mitigation.
Good evening. We have a short PowerPoint presentation for you, so let's see how my expertise works here. And I'll be talking a little bit. Get that up and running here.
This is great, Kate.
Little
Well
map.
done. Nice.
There you
It
go.
is really nice. Yeah. Makes it easy. Ta-da.
Okay.
Definitely can't wait.
Good evening, everyone. Jeremy Ginsberg, Planning and Zoning Director. Talk a little bit about flooding, and tonight's meeting is really the second meeting we've had. You may recall Ed and I were here with engineer Craig Flaherty back about a month ago, almost a month to the day, right after the September storms, to talk a little bit about flooding. So I'm going to cover, the first part of the presentation is going to be kind of a summary, rehash, talk about some of the things we talked about a month ago, talk a little bit about this map, which brings in some new aspects, some new dynamics. Ed's going to talk a little bit about what we have going forward, and Mark's here to answer any questions you may have, and then Wayne Fox is going to talk about policy issues at the end. So let's try to recall when we were here about a month ago. We talked a lot about, especially Craig with his expertise in engineering and data gathering on the storms. We talked about the fact that the September 1st and 2nd storm was really a 200 or 500 year storm because it was such a large amount of rain in a very short duration. It was 7.9 inches of rain condensed into a few hours. We talked a little bit about the role our office has, the Planning and Zoning Office has, in terms of regulation for new development going forward, what the zoning regulations require in terms of stormwater management for new developments, and how that's changed over time to become more and more restrictive to try to minimize impacts and for new development to address their stormwater issues and drainage. We talked about Darien's watersheds. You may recall there's 5 watersheds in Darien, some of which extend all the way to New Canaan. We talked about the prior watershed studies, Goodwise River, Stony Brook, you may recall those. There's also been one for the 5 Mile River. Talked a little bit about Flood Mitigation Committee, and had talked about the Norotan Heights Drainage Project. When Jamie just mentioned Darien's bicentennial, puts into perspective how long Darien's been here. But when you look at that 200-year, now 201-year time frame, wetlands regulations and flood regulations have only been around for a very short time in the grand scheme of things. So as properties get developed in the 50s and 60s, there were no regulations limiting where you could put houses relative to wetlands, areas with high water tables, and in the flood zone, or what flood zones didn't exist. So you put your house in, it wasn't in a flood zone, and turns out as FEMA developed flood regulations and flood mapping in the 80s, we realized that a lot of houses were put probably where they shouldn't be. We talked in this slide about the floodway, which is a little different than the flood zone. The floodway is to preserve the portion of the floodplain which conveys floodwaters upstream to downstream. So it's important to keep that as open as possible. You may recall at the last meeting, Craig and Ed discussed that climate change and data has shown that as time has gone on, we've hit bigger storms. The one that we had recently was arguably as big as we've had since the mid-1950s. Our drainage infrastructure, the pipes, the underground conveyances are designed for a 50-year storm. They're not designed for 200 or 500-year storm. We do have very strict stormwater regulations, called low-impact design, and our goal is to minimize future flood impacts by either getting people out of the floodway, the flood zone, or lifting them. So if a flood does come through, they're less likely to get water in their first floor. We talked last time as well about the role of private property owners because, as you can see from this map, much of this is on the waterways in Darien and go through private property. There has been progress made in the past 10 to 20 years about folks in Darien lifting their homes and others who rebuilt in the flood zone, rebuilding at a higher elevation. You may recall after Storm Sandy, within a few years after that, there were about 15 to 20 folks in Norotan Bay and about 4 people on Cherry Street, right over there, who lifted their houses. Ed just completed a few years ago with his team over in DPW a drainage project to mitigate flooding in the Intervale Holmes Abbey Road neighborhood. Darien has purchased 2 properties to, again, minimize flooding. One was a house on Cherry Street that was removed, and then the property over at 41 Hecker, which is, again, partially in the Stony Brook floodway to, again, make sure water doesn't impede in that area. The new flood regulations in the zoning office and the new building code requires that first floor elevations be at least 1 foot above the base flood. Any mechanical units as well need to be at least 1 foot above the base flood. If you live in a flood zone and your new construction, you cannot have a basement. So there's many standards and limits that the flood regulations include. This slide, we talked about it last time, but it's really important. And when Ed and I were putting together the presentation, I think it's something we want to reiterate, that when you look at the way Darien is laid out, we're a coastal community. We're on Long Island Sound. And if you look at those watersheds, the Norotan River watershed in orange, all the way on the left, extends all the way to New Canaan. Similarly, the Goodwives River watershed and the Stony Brook watershed, and the 5 Mile River watershed takes a lot of Norwalk's water, but it also takes some New Canaan water. If someone spills a glass of water on their lawn in South New Canaan, that water is going into Darien. It's traveling all the way down the waterway. That's why we get oftentimes more impact from storms than, say, New Canaan, because their water, the way the watersheds are, it comes downhill. The water comes through Darien. So it's essential to realize that we have a situation here that's a function of our geography, where we are, a lot of low-lying spots, a lot of development in the flood zone because Darien developed in the 50s before flood regulations. So we have a lot of factors working against us, and the other factor is there's more rain coming from the sky than in the past. So we'll talk a little bit more about this map. Ed's going to talk about some of the topics we're going to cover tonight, what's been done since the last storm and the last presentation. Ed, take it away.
Good evening. As we move forward here, Jeremy kind of took us through where we are to this point. My job now is to talk about where we've been able to gather information, and from there, how we decided to move forward with selection of projects, investigative work, hiring consultants, and so on. So the topics we're going to start tonight were the development of our Dpw Tracking Sheet. We selected information from the Darien EOC emails, phone calls to our department, First Selectmen, P&Z, building department. We had the Q alert system. We took all of those incoming data points and put them on a spreadsheet so we could track them. Figured this was the only way we'd be able to identify and maybe correlate common projects in certain areas, common projects, as in whether it be a drainage improvement or a sinkhole or catch basin repair and so on. So that's what we did. So from there, we identified our next steps. We went into prioritizing them. We were looking at major flooding to homes, first floors, basements, those types of things were ranked a little bit higher. Life and safety issues were important to us, where the roads were blocked, where the underpasses were blocked. Bridges and culverts were a major concern of ours. We're wondering if there are issues with their sizes, their any damage that may have been done to them, any clogging that may have happened, and then last but of course not least, just property flooding in its all by itself, where it didn't get into the house, but the house was basically an island where water was around it. We had quite a few of those too. Not that we downplayed any of them. I've been out and spoken to, I'm thinking maybe 30 property owners so far. I still have a couple more to do, but it's getting that information was important going forward and prioritizing some of these areas. And as I go through, I'll show you how I did my best to coordinate them so we can move ahead. We also had DPW inspections, maintenance, and improvements that were done. And we'll talk about a little bit more about those. Drainage studies and analysis. There's going to be some in-house stuff done. There's going to be the hiring of some consultants moving forward. Smaller project, larger projects, but we've categorized those also.
Next slide, Ed. Next slide.
Not yet. There's a button on here somewhere, right? I'm just going to press it. Hopefully it'll go. And then finally, the Board of Selectmen, the policies and issues, decisions. We got issues with outreach, and I think these meetings that we've been doing, this will be our second, informing the public of what we're doing as a town is very important. Property acquisitions, they've heard about them already, and some establishments of boards and authorities, and I think Wayne's going to chime in at the end and give us a little background on that too. I'm going to, sorry, you're right. Should go into that. Not the tracking sheet, I'm sorry. I couldn't fit it all on one page right there. I didn't think you were going to see it anyway, but this is what we've been using. There's about 100 properties on here right now. I'm gonna say that I'm not perfect. If I've missed one or two properties, and people aren't hearing from me, please call me. Please send me an email. I'm very easy to get in touch with. But we think we've collected just about everything we have here. The color coding is going to drive us to whether it's a larger drainage study. Green is the blue is the larger ones. The green is the ones where we're going to do it in-house. Our inspection teams are out there. Jonathan with his crews are out cleaning them, checking to make sure they're structurally sound. But at the bottom of the list, from the red down, you're going to see that we've gone out and cleaned all of our catch basins stuff. Anything that's called in, we've been out to it already. So we're about halfway through the list, and it's more of clear maintenance stuff than anything else.
So what I wanted to do is just interject here, because Mark's here with us, talk a little bit about what's been accomplished since September 1st. You may recall big storms. Mark was the resource for folks who had flood damage, flood issues. Mark said he spoke to over 200 people in the past 50 days. It was even a shorter duration than that. So hundreds of people submitting emails, calling, going out to their property, meeting with them in person, where you had to explain the permitting procedures, FEMA grants, if there's FEMA funds available, FEMA paperwork, etc. Our office over in Planning and Zoning spoke to dozens of people. Sometimes they were the same, sometimes it was a different group. Our group over in Planning and Zoning talked about the rebuilding. I got damaged. What permits do I need to rebuild? Does it exceed the 50% of the value of the house, where now I have to lift the house, because that's part of the FEMA rules. So a lot of time and effort. I know building official Mike Vitti and I went out to a number of properties to see damage firsthand and talk to the property owners. So it's been a team effort. You got Mark, Planning and Zoning, Building. Ed's going to talk a little bit about his group, which are actually out there cleaning catch basins and checking pipes and all of that. But we want to kind of make sure we were covered on all aspects there.
Let's jump ahead.
I hit it twice. There you go.
How's that? Okay. So though Jeremy and Mark, they have been extremely busy, so has DPW. We have gone through and done some initial evaluations and modifications already. We are looking at bridge crossing and abutments right now. We've gone out and myself and Darren done inspections on a lot of them. We are hiring a consultant to go back and look at a couple because of what we found. Culvert inspections and maintenance by DPW staff and our consultant. We're going to include some of that in some of our drainage designs, so that's important. Catch basin repairs and replacements. This is a little I'm going to say redundant because after July we had gone out and repaired maybe 10-15 catch basins that basically just washed out around them. So if you pulled up to these basins, all you saw was a crater around the catch basins. We did the repair on them, went back and found a lot of them washed out a second time. What we found the second time, though, the extent of the flooding was so bad, it exposed actually pipes that we didn't find the first time. They bring the pipe up to the catch basin backside, and then they stopped it. So whatever the water was coming through kind of just washed away everything that was around, all the fines and soils, all washed downstream. So we found those out. We've actually reconnected everything to the catch basins now. Hopefully these won't flood out like this again. I found that to be quite interesting. With numerous sinkholes for repairs throughout town, we're installing curbing and aprons in some areas. We've gone on Great Hill, Camp Avenue. We just finished a project or just wrapping up a project over on the corner of West Avenue and Hollow Tree. These are things that we can do in-house or with our contractor immediately. Things that we noticed that if we were able to direct the water away from certain areas, it's actually going to be better. So these are items that we did right away, and Jonathan jumped right on those as soon as we identified them. We also have modification and grades along roadways. We have a problem. You'll see it on the map. It's over on West Avenue in Fairfield. A very unique problem because of the way the roadway is graded coming out of Fairfield onto West Avenue. We're going to make some modifications and changes there, throw in an additional structure and some tie-in. So these are things that I don't need to go to a consultant with. I'm more than capable of making that analysis, designing those things and implementing them. So those are other projects we're moving forward to. Just some simple ones also, trying to keep debris and trash out of our drainage system. We just placed a new trash rack down on Woodland Park that crosses over right by West Avenue. We redesigned it a little bit so that it would actually have more surface area for the debris to get caught on and still allow water to get into it. The one that was there relatively flat, this one we actually opened up and made much bigger. I do want to say that this process for some of these items that I'm putting forward is, the timeline is relatively short. But some of the other ones that you're going to see that we're looking at are going to take some time to do the analysis on, do the drainage study, and properly come up with solutions to whatever we can do out there to mitigate the flooding out there. And along with that timeline being extended, the funding along with it. There's going to be substantial funding to go with this to keep these projects moving forward and to completion. What I do want to say about the September 2nd storm is I don't want to judge our infrastructure based on a storm of that magnitude. What I will take away from that storm is the areas that didn't flood. I think it's a good indicator to know what a large storm like that, what didn't get inundated. Because moving forward, if those areas do or are impacted by a storm, that raises a red flag for me. So this is going to be important going forward, making sure that I map this out and keep this map for my career here and whoever follows. So let's take a look at our proposed study areas. Now, we're going to call this map number 1. It's all going to be map number 1, folks. I'm just going to roll into some of the different colors that are there. We have the green circled areas on this map. And you're more than welcome to come up and take a look at it after. We'll leave it here for you. What this is infrastructure under investigation by the DPW or consultants and requires maintenance. So we're going to go out and take a look at these areas and see what the problems are. They may be flooding that was caused by a small pipe or two underneath a roadway. We're going to make sure that that pipe is not clogged and is functioning properly, investigate the areas that's feeding those pipes, and if need be, do an analysis on it to see if those pipes are big enough. I got a lot of requests of just put in 2 more pipes. Just put in a bigger pipe. That's not the answer. The answer is making sure that whatever you do doesn't impact the downstream properties as well. So that's a step that has to be taken. So, and I did list some of the areas that I had. I had Dorchester, Hickory, and Deepwood. There's Kelsey Moore and Catherine Streets. That's an interesting piece of properties down there. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's Lake Drive, Peach Hill. I do have West Avenue and Fairfield listed on here, and there's some others that may come up, I may add to the list later. Okay, the blue circled ones are proposed study areas for an outside consultants, and we're currently obtaining proposals from them. And the things that we're looking to do is, and try to resolve is, why did these areas flood? What level of flooding is anticipated for different frequency storms? I want the consultant to do a 1, a 2, a 5, a 10, 25, 50, and 100. For us, it's nowadays it's running a different model with a different flow. Gathering that information is going to be important. I can say that I did get 2 of the proposals back first thing this morning. I just haven't had a chance to go through them just yet. I'm hopeful to do that tomorrow or Wednesday so that I can get these things signed off and moving forward. And I guess the other one is what can be done to minimize? What are some of the solutions? We have a great consultants that are going to tell us what's wrong, or what the problems are, or they may tell us that this area is supposed to flood now. That may happen. I'm not going to tell you it's not going to, but if they come up with some type of problem and there's a solution to it, I'm going to have them put a number to it too. It's good to have the estimates going forward, because it's good to talk about prioritizing projects, not based on just the number of houses, but there's a cost involved with that. Maybe you can bundle a couple projects and get a couple things done at once, based on how you bid them out. So I did list some of the areas. We'll talk about those. The Salt Box, Coach Lamp, Pleasant, Thomasina. It has never flooded before, according to the people that live there the longest, and I've had a chance to speak to about 10 of them, 12 of them just in that neighborhood, and there's more that wanted to talk to me, and we've been going back by email, but it was an eye-opening experience to see some of the video. Intersection of Salt Box and Salt Box East had 3.5 feet of water in it. The pathway between Coach Lamp and Salt Box East basically was a river of water just going through it. We want to identify where the sources of water are coming from. I want to find out if the system in Salt Box is designed properly. It's a 30-inch pipe. You would think that would be big enough. I don't know. I don't know the drainage area, and that's part of the job. So that was part of the scope of work that I gave out. That is one of the ones that I got back a quote today, and we'll be looking into. West Avenue and Bailey was the second one. Again, another area. Just north of the railroad tracks, backs up to West Avenue and Bailey. It's in the corner. 3.5 feet of water in the houses, and the only flooding they've seen, I guess, in their time that they've been there is up to the wetland area, maybe up to their driveway, but never inside their buildings. So that was quite a large change in what had happened over there. So that was a second area that we picked. A third one, interestingly enough, is the Tilly Grove Street, Brook Street area. We just had a meeting with the Baywater folks who want to participate with the town in identifying what's going on in this area now. They have a vested interest. The town has a vested interest in the area. The Grove Street area was hit hard by those 2 storms, and they would like to know, along with the town, what is the problem over there now. There is an original study done. We'll be piggybacking on that, enhancing it with new information and data, and making sure that we analyze the property to see what size storms actually can be handled in the area, which ones actually need to be enhanced with drainage. And I applaud David Genovese for stepping up and contacting us and wanting to become involved in that too. It'll be something that there's a private-public partnership as we go forward.
Excuse me, Ed, can
Yes.
I just pause and ask you a question about the original study for Grove Street? When was that done? Do you recall?
2007.
Okay. And were there recommendations that came from that study that were not implemented?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't recall in the report if it did have it or not, Jamie.
Okay, thank you.
The final one is Kensett, and I only mentioned that being it's a newer development, they had quite a few homes, and I think probably Mark could give me the number. I didn't know how many, but there's quite a few that flooded over there. Being in a new development, I thought that was something to mention, and they've already hired a consultant that they're working privately with to determine what the issues are there. Sorry, I'm a little slow here. All right, the final circles on this map here are in black. They proposed inspections and repairs of culvert, bridges, and dams. And we're currently getting quotes for the majority on this list right now. Actually, all of them except for the two private ones at the end. We did have damage to the Goodwise River Dam. We did have a consultant come down and take a look at that with us. So we're moving forward right now with a plan to do a repair. We're trying to get in order the permits that we're going to need moving forward. The bridge itself, we're going to have a separate consultant come in, someone that did the original design for the bridge. They're coming down to take a look at that. We have a quote from them. Old Kings Highway Bridge. That one right now is being inspected also. We had a notification of scour critical issues on that one, along with the Camp Avenue. So we bundled them together. We're having a consultant come down. They gave us a proposal, come down and inspect those also. The other two locations, Prospect Avenue Bridge and the Overbrook Road Culvert, I went out and inspected those myself. We've already had a contractor to come in and do an emergency repair on those to make sure there's no further damage done to the bridge or the culverts that go under those roadways. The last two on the list are Meadowbrook Road, which is private, and Stony Brook Road is a private bridge to number 49. I only put those on there so that you could see that the magnitude of these storms, they impacted a lot of folks, not just our roadways and bridges, not just private property, but a lot of these structures, a lot of our culverts, a lot of private culverts were hit hard. And it's going to take some time to get these back in order. I know 49 Stony Brook has already been into our office and planning and zoning for the last month, trying to move forward on the permit process and repair to that access to that home. And finally, my favorite topic, dealing with the DOT and Metro North pipes and culverts. I had an opportunity to walk to one of them, only because I don't believe anyone's ever had. And I found out there that the culvert was relatively clean, but the approach to it wasn't. So I had to make contact with the property owner to have them go out there and clean it up, which, with that in place, the next thing is it moves into the culvert and clogs it up. But what we're finding on some of these areas, in particularly Tokenique Road and Goodwise River, there's something not right in that area. It's something that the DOT needs to come down and take a hard look at. They were in such a big hurry to come down here to originally repair the roadway when it first happened. Mm-hmm. I was getting emergency waiver requests to come out and work, and yet it hasn't been fixed yet. So I'm thinking that somebody has gotten the attention of someone to take a look at that before they fix the roadway, and I think that's important. So I will continue to push that forward. I think it needs to be done. I think they at least need to evaluate it. Either that culvert underneath the railroad or the one under the road, something happened there that shouldn't happen, not for a state road. The other one is Holmes Avenue. That's a particular, it's an odd culvert. It changes sizes underneath the railroad tracks. And I've been speaking to the DOT about that. That's a flooding issue that happens on a regular basis with those low intensity storms. It just can't get the water through. The beginning of the culvert's quite large. When you look underneath, it actually becomes smaller. So I'm going to continue to talk to them about. But the last one, Kelsey Moore and Catherine, This one's particular interest to me only because of the engineering aspects that were applied here when they first did this, and they did this 20 years ago. They extended a pipe. They took a 60-inch pipe and extended it with a 54-inch diameter pipe, and it just didn't make any sense to me. Fortunately, it didn't make any sense to Craig Flaherty either, because he had written a letter, it was in the file, and I had an opportunity to read it, and his analysis and his assumptions that were taken looked like it's something that we need to continue to push the DOT first and foremost to get them out to recognize that they need to analyze it now. You know, if they don't do that, there's always an opportunity that I can and show them what the calculations are showing and why it should not be that size of pipe and what you did when you made it that size and pushed the end of the pipe up gradient about 2 feet. That just causes the flooding to possibly get higher. So with that said, I do have them coming down this Friday to inspect the pipe all the way out to the Norotan River. They said they would do that. They also want to work on one of the back properties. I'm having a hard time getting hold of the owner of number 3 Moore Street. So if anyone knows who that is and can get me a contact person, I'd love to. The Metro North wants to go in there and regrade the swale along their back property so that they don't get flooded through their back property and out onto Moore Street, actually redirect the water. So I've called the number I've had. Mark was nice enough to track down a number, but I just can't seem to get a hold of who the property owner is. And I know it's a small town, so someone must know who the folks are, and hopefully I'll hear from them.
Do you want to hand out?
Oh, sure.
So I'm just going to,
Walk around.
while Ed's giving you a copy of the handout from tonight, I want to talk to you a little bit about this map that Ed's referenced a number of times and talk a little bit about properties in the flood zone and floodway. Fred Donite of my office was nice enough to put this map together for us. It shows flood zones in blue. It shows the watersheds in a red line, so you can see which watershed each property is in. It shows the floodway, which is red crosshatched. And what we're able to do is show the properties that are in the flood zone in red and in the floodway in black. So when I talked a little bit earlier about the number of properties in the flood zone in Darien, there's about 3,700 structures. That's not only houses, but it's garages, sheds, pool houses, things like that. So not all of them are single-family houses. We estimate there's about 160 structures in the floodway. Similarly, not all of those are single-family houses, but again, we're talking a lot of properties that are impacted potentially in a flooding situation. And as Ed noted here with his different green and blue circles, the way we selected some of them is to look at areas that are not in the flood zone. So for example, Coachland, Tomasina, Saltbox, that's not shown in a flood zone. That's why it's so intriguing to figure out what the situation is there. And similarly, West Avenue and Fairfield, and then some smaller situations throughout town, which might be isolated situations that might be able to be solved a little easier. But as we said, we'll leave this map with you. It shows floodway, flood zone, and the areas that Ed's proposing to study. So the last slide was a summary of since Storm Ida hit. We had Mark working the EOC, talking to property owners, receiving the letters, the emails, the pictures. Ed and his group are out in the field cleaning catch basins, again meeting with property owners. We've since identified these study areas. Some are going to be public-private partnerships. Some are going to be done in-house. Some might not yet trigger a study. We're still investigating. Out in the field, DPW and the crew. Planning and zoning is still meeting with folks. Building department's meeting with folks to explain flood regulations, what you have to do to rebuild. And then the last step really becomes what next in terms of not only going out in the field, but from a policy standpoint. And I know Wayne Fox, you've had a number of conversations with Jamie, with Kate, with myself, in terms of what can be done, stormwater authorities, flood and erosion control boards, things like that. So that's a good place for us to leave here. And I don't know if you want Wayne to pick it up from here in terms of policy issues and policy considerations for the Board of Selectmen.
Yes, definitely, but before we do that, Mark, could you update us on your work with the 10, 12 repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss properties?
So right after the July 9th storm and the September 1st storm, we sent out a public campaign saying that report your damages to the EOC email box. We had approximately 200 after Ida, and the July 9th storm was about 150. So definitely there was an increase there. Weeding through all those and setting them up for the state report to report all the damages to the state took some time. And ultimately the Ida storm, FEMA came into town with the state. We did 36 houses on 2 occasions, so about 76 houses and businesses were inspected by these teams. Happy to report to everyone that with those reports, Governor Lamont has sought a disaster declaration as of Friday. I don't even know if that was made public yet, but I know emails have circulated, so we're getting there. I would hope that the president will make his decision quickly. Through all this process, as we mentioned, meeting homeowners, the ones that I'm aware of through history that have significant first floor, kitchen, living room, bedroom damages, I visited personally, spoke to many a homeowner, and FEMA went out there as well. And part of the discussion is always what can we do about it for the future and mitigate those circumstances. So in the discussions, I have about 10 to 12 homeowners that would like to either elevate and or seek acquisition of their homes to remove them from, I believe most of those are floodways, not flood zones. In my workload that basically since July 9th has been constantly on floods, flood damages, and post-damage reports, I think it would be beneficial, and we've discussed this quite routinely about getting a consultant in here too, from one end to the other, apply for these grants, someone with a grant writing background that has been successful, and potentially seek some relief for some of these homeowners. And it really is homes that have this problem. I know there's some businesses that also have routine flooding, but really those don't really have anything to do with FEMA. The SBA can assist those people, Small Business Administration. So that's pretty much my report for the moment. And the big thing for me is to remind everyone that flood insurance is important, and you don't have to be in a flood zone for flood insurance, and you don't have to own the property to have flood insurance. It's just like insuring your car or your home. It's important. Most homeowners' policies do not cover floods, water infiltration as they call it. Any questions? Did I miss anything?
No, thank you, Mark. Dewberry is who we're hoping will be coming
Yes.
to the assist
I was,
with the grant
very
applications.
happy with his knowledge
Yes.
in our discussion.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, Wayne, good evening.
Good evening. Just for the record, my name is Wayne Fox. I'm town attorney for the town of Darien. Initially, let me say I would be remiss if I did not take a moment, as briefly as possible, to thank you all for the contributions that you and this board have made to this fine community. I think I know firsthand the difficulty and the time it takes for you and from your family to participate as you do. You as a group have always been very inquisitive. You've asked good questions, you've raised good issues, and you have made the job of my office much easier, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Getting back to the more mundane, let me say that as you folks know, we have what is called an Environmental Protection Commission. This commission has been given very broad powers, as is outlined in section 22-27 of our code. The Commission shall have and may exercise from time to time all the powers and authority conferred upon it as a Municipal Conservation Commission, the Inland Wetlands Commission, and more importantly, for purposes of this discussion, as a Flood and Erosion Control Board under Section 25-84 of the statutes. In light of the flooding that has occurred over the last several months, and we're told quite possibly this evening, there has been passed by the legislature what is known as House Bill 641 that provided municipalities in Connecticut with the ability to establish what is called a storm authority to oversee and establish local stormwater management programs. As you can imagine, by its very nature, there is the possibility of not what I would call a conflict, but an overlap between what they may do and what is done by our existing commission. The statute became effective in July of 2021, and it allows municipalities to adopt by ordinance and approval of the legislative body this stormwater authority. What I found interesting in the legislation is that it gave the municipality not only the authority to establish this entity, but also to take the powers that are contained in the legislation and assign it to an existing entity, an existing body within the town. That would be, or could be, a particular help in light of the fact that we already have an environmental commission which has these powers. Let me point out for you that the one thing I'm sure you don't want is somewhere down the road to have two entities with conflicting powers that may be in disagreement as to what may be the best process and policy for the town to go through. That is one of the issues which I think you as an entity or the new board would have to consider when making a determination as to whether or not to adopt these powers. Just to give you some background or distinction between the entities involved, the Environmental Protection Board, which is the equivalent in acting as a Flood and Erosion Control Board, has the authority under 25-86 of the statutes to actually condemn property on its own without approval of the town. It has the ability to purchase, condemn real property or interest therein, which it determines is necessary for use in connection with a flood and erosion control system. It has the authority to issue bonds or other evidence of debt if it determines in its own discretion it is necessary to construct or reconstruct any flood or erosion control systems. It has the ability to receive gifts, accept and receive or expend those gifts, devices or bequests of money, lands, or other properties to be used in furtherance of its statutory purposes. It has the ability to apply for grants, may apply and receive grants from the state, federal government, and also from private sources. It has the ability to enter into agreements with the federal and state government. It has the ability to negotiate and cooperate and enter into agreements with the United States and the state of Connecticut for the purpose of flood prevention and erosion control. So this is all subject to the approval of DEP. Under the new authority passed by the legislature, the stormwater authorities, if one were to be established, would have the ability, subject to prior approval by the RTM, propose and levy fees on properties in designated stormwater districts to be used for the sole purpose of control or abatement of stormwater pollution. It can provide public information and outreach. The stormwater authorities provide public education and outreach in the municipality relating to stormwater management activities and establish a procedure for public participation. It has the ability to adopt special management programs. They may develop a stormwater management program for construction and post-construction site stormwater runoff. I think the distinction, well, let me add one other thing. Both of these entities would have the ability and the authority to enter into agreements with other municipalities. They are authorized to enter into agreements with surrounding municipalities to form joint plans or management programs. Both will be subject to DEP commissioner. I think it's important to recognize that as a matter of policy, I think the Environmental Protection Board has the broader scope of and purpose of authority to act as needed. I think it's, by contrast, the stormwater authorities are only empowered to acquire, plan, construct, repair, manage, and supervise stormwater control systems, which is a vague term not explicitly defined in the statutes. My recommendation to you would be that you, at least as a matter of policy, consider the possibility of taking those powers and assigning them to the existing Environmental Protection Board. Obviously, it would be with the input and the suggestions that Jeremy and others within his office may have to contribute. But as you look at the new statute and what it can do, the existing statutes and what it can do, there's some concern that I would have to establish a new entity when you can take what you have and meld into it the power that has been authorized by the new statute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Wayne? Kip?
Wayne, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. The existing statute that affects the Environmental Protection Commission, they have the power to condemn
They do.
on their own,
Yes, sir.
and they have the power to raise funds
Yes, they do.
already.
Yes, sir.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Monica?
So mechanism for, sorry, go ahead, Monica.
So Wayne, the stormwater needs RTM approval, but the other entity, however we do it, doesn't need RTM approval?
If in fact you wish to establish a new board,
Uh-huh.
then that legislation gives a municipality with the approval of the RTM the authority to do that. A second option would be take that authority of a stormwater entity or authority and assign it to an existing entity with the power to act in accordance with the new statute. I do not believe that would require, that would need an amendment to our ordinances. It would not, which would need the approval of the RTM. So in either case, the RTM is going to be involved.
Okay.
So, Ed, what is, let's say that we chose to assign the stormwater authorities to the Environmental Protection Commission as exists today.
Yes, sir.
Specifically in the stormwater authority documentation, it allows for the assessment of fees specifically and only to be used for the purpose of stormwater flood mitigation issues.
Under that portion of it, yes, sir.
It sounds to me like, as a layperson, that sounds to me very akin to what we currently have in the sewer commission, in that the sewer commission assesses fees based on utilization, and all of those funds are used specifically for the sewer system. Is that accurate?
It's similar, yes, it is.
Okay. And what is the mechanism if we don't make the EPC a stormwater authority? What is the mechanism of funding for any operations, projects, et cetera, that they choose to implement related to stormwater management?
Obviously, you do not have to do either. Your options are two, in my opinion. Number one, you can amend the existing ordinances to assimilate some of the authorities given to the stormwater authority. Or you have the opportunity, should you wish, to establish with the assistance of the RTM, establish this stormwater authority with the powers given to that entity under the new statute.
So would that, if we were to do it that way, does that assign the power to the EPC to determine and levy the same designated specified fees that the stormwater authority is specifically allowed to do under the legislation?
Yes, sir, it would have that same authority.
So it would allow the EPC to establish a separate, dedicated, use-oriented fee for stormwater management.
Everything that the stormwater authority would or could do under the proposed or the past legislation, the Environmental Protection Commission would have that same authority, or could have that same authority, under the amendment of that ordinance.
Do we have to, if we do nothing about a stormwater authority, what are the limiting factors by empowering the EPC to utilize the powers that they already have? Is there anything that is in the Stormwater Authority Enabling Act that is an enhancement to what the EPC already can do?
Yes. First of all, you do not have to do anything.
Right.
You do not have to approve
Right.
or pass legislation as suggested. If you do nothing, then the authority that entity has now under the flood and erosion control statutes is what it is, it stays what it is as it now works. If in fact you wish to amend that to give us some of the powers that are outlined in that public act, you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, so I'm looking at some of the answers that you provided to Kate on her follow-ups. And I see here that you say that the Darien EPC, through its capacity as an erosion control board, may impose special assessments on benefiting property owners to administer its flood or erosion control systems. In fact, one could argue that the erosion control board's power to issue special assessments is greater and is not subject to some of the unique caps placed on certain landowners or even prior RTM approval, as is the Storm Water Authority's power to levy fees. So really what I'm trying to drill down is, do we have what we need already to do projects, to fund projects, to impose fees? Or do we need to take on this Stormwater Authority, the new law, to do what we might want to do?
The new law would give you more flexibility, more authority than you have now.
Okay. All right.
Jamie, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Creating a new board, like Stormwater Authority, that would require a charter change, correct?
No, require an
No.
ordinance.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And that would allow it to raise funds and?
Yes.
Okay,
It
interesting.
would allow it to do everything that the new statute says it can do.
Okay.
And then you risk having two different
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
organizations.
That's the
Yeah.
downside, yes, sir.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Monica?
Wayne, so the stormwater has one thing in here, it says, consider all applicable regional and municipal hazard mitigation plans. So that's a requirement in the stormwater. So that means that anything we do, we have to coordinate with other.
No, that's not how I read it. It gives you the ability to do that. You are not mandated to do it.
It says it also adds a new subsection to 2585, which requires ECBs in planning for and in conducting its activities to A, consider all applicable regional and municipal hazard mitigation plans.
Consider. You don't have to participate.
Okay.
And that sounds like it's related to the Erosion Control Board, not the Stormwater Authority.
No, this expands, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, Wayne, I still just want to double check. The EPC has the authority to levy special assessments, and Stormwater Authority can establish fees.
Correct.
So Stormwater Authority fees are the equivalent to the current sewer fees that are paid,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
right?
Correct.
Because the sewer fee is not a tax per se, it's designated as a fee.
Correct.
But a special assessment, stuck in my head, a special assessment is special assessment to a selected group of properties that are affected by the project that is to be incurred, as opposed to fees which might be applicable to a broader universe of properties and residents.
You can make the argument, if you look at both sections of the statutes, the existing statute and the recently adopted statute, that in either case, there's an ability to raise money. How you do it,
The
what?
mechanism for raising the money is different.
It is, yes it is.
A special assessment is a special, I guess the question is a special assessment limited to a select group, or can a special assessment be levied against all of the properties in town?
I think the intent is to have it assessed against the properties that are getting the benefit of the action.
But you might be able to make an argument that, at least I could try and make a good argument that the entire town benefits from that. So that's a really good question. Do you assess only in a portion of a watershed, or in one particular area, or do you assess the town at large?
Right, and how do you decide who benefits?
Right.
from them?
Right.
That's difficult.
Yeah, that's one of the distinctions that I was focusing on. One of the other things I wanted to ask about is specifically in the Town Plan of Conservation and Development and in the Flood Mitigation Strategy Committee report from 2010, there's a reference to acquiring properties in either, I'm not sure if it's a flood zone specifically or floodways, because unfortunately the write-up that I did to talk about tonight, I left on my desk. So I have some of the old reports, I don't have the actual write-up here. Do both of these mechanisms allow for the establishment of a fund for property acquisition to acquire properties that are in floodways or flood zones when and if they become available, because we know that everybody will not want to sell?
That authority exists now.
That authority exists now.
Yes, it does.
If I could, I don't think you need either of those boards to have that authority. The town could establish a fund, and we did have a fund, which we used part of it to, towards the purchase of, property improvements, a land acquisition fund. So there's nothing to stop us from having, right, we could have a land acquisition fund for use, for these kind of purposes.
And then the mechanism for funding something like that, absent setting up a separate stormwater authority, would be the traditional mechanisms for, that we have in terms of the general,
The authority of a municipality to do so.
general taxation authorities
Yes.
for either regular operating, allocation out of regular operating budget, which would be basically a reserving mechanism, or a special allocation as needed, approved probably through the capital project
Mhm.
approval process.
Yes, Sarah,
Actually, I had a question, and
Sure.
that's okay.
for the
Jeremy.
audience.
Question for you. I was talking to a resident who said that since she's lived in the house, and I think she had lived in the house for 50 years, that the flood zone mapping had changed. How many times has that happened? And can you remember, twice in 50 years, twice in 10 years?
Sure, the flood maps get updated by FEMA, let's call it once every 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
However, there were two big changes recently. One was when the Goodwives River study was done, there was a letter of map revision. Malone and Broom then took it to the next level. They did their analysis and said, these are properties that are really now, the flood lines have changed a little bit. So there was a change for the Goodwives River, and then there was another one for Stony Brook. So there were numerous changes in 2013.
Okay.
I remember, you may recall that Hamilton Lane was one of the areas that was changed pretty significantly. Jamie, you recall that. There is also a procedure, which is a little different, which is called a letter of map revision or a letter of map amendment, where let's say a homeowner is really close to being in the flood zone, but if they put this much fill around their house, they could quote unquote fill their way out of the flood zone. So they'd hire an engineer, get them to submit the paperwork, and you can submit what's called a letter of map revision, letter of map amendment. Those are isolated properties that FEMA doesn't update the maps for those. But the big map changes, there was the original maps done in 81, there were maps done again in 85, and then so about every 5 to 10 years, there is some slight changes, but the biggest changes we've seen are as a result of the Goodwives River study and the Stony Brook study as well.
Okay, and then just for terminology, floodway is, you assume that it is going to flood if you have a very large storm.
Yes, because the river, the brook, the
Yeah.
stream is coming right at you.
Right.
That's where the water should be going.
Right.
So can I tack on to that really quickly? So a really large storm, do we call the 25-year storm a really large storm? The 50-year storm a really large storm? What events would we expect the floodway to flood?
I'll answer first as a non-engineer, and then I'm going to toss it to the engineer. I would say, if you're in the floodway, I would say a 25-year storm, you can expect some level. Ed, do you think it's 25 or 50?
Yeah, FEMA starts their calculations at 100, but the floodway is designated as your area of velocity or flow.
Right.
And that's where you should expect and want to see overflow stay during any size storm, 25, 50, 100, 500, whatever it may be.
Okay.
That's why that designation is so critical to building any type of structure or having some type of structure in it. And you have to know that the risk there is quite large in comparison to being in a flood hazard zone.
And I think someone mentioned the number of properties that we think are in the floodways currently.
Structures, yeah, not necessarily all city. Yeah.
160 in the floodway.
In the floodway.
Yeah.
Three-
So those could be garages
3,700 in
or
the
barns or
flood
things
zone.
like that. They might not all be people living in them,
Right.
but there are structures that are more susceptible, let's use that word,
Mhm.
because of the fact they're so close to the water body.
I'm
Sarah?
sorry, Sarah, cut you off. What?
That's okay, I just wanna, is there a way, this map, is it on our town site? Is there a way for people to understand, boy, I didn't realize, but I live in a floodway? And, there were some streets that you didn't name in the map areas, and I'm wondering, are those because they weren't flood zones, they were floodways? Crimmins or Hecker?
Okay, I'll start with the first
Okay.
two, and then I'll kick it to Ed. Certainly, the FEMA maps are on the town website.
Okay.
I believe they show the floodway
Mm-hmm.
on the FEMA maps.
Okay.
FEMA maps are getting better and better, but they're still not as easy to read as this. This is a little easier to read.
Right.
Certainly, if people want to come to our office, the ultimate question will be a updated land survey.
Right.
Because in some cases, I mean, you can see that it's really close call. So you'd get the surveyor to drill down to the exact elevation down to the 1/10 of a foot. So the flood elevation might be 13, but your house might be at 13.1, and it might be a little bit, few inches, a few feet outside, which the FEMA maps don't drill down to that
Of
level.
course, yeah.
So that was question one. Question two is relative to this map and areas we discussed tonight and some areas that we didn't discuss. And Ed and I, when we put together the presentation, spent a lot of time on that question is, there's a lot of work to be done. How do we prioritize?
Right.
And that was the struggle we had. So that's why Ed tried to break it down into three areas: the green, the blue, and the black.
Right.
So the black was the bridges, the overpasses, the culverts. Here where the Good Wives goes over Prospect, or over Overbrook Road, there's culvert here. The blue area here was a whole neighborhood that flooded, but it's not in the flood zone.
Right.
The area mentioned here, the public-private Tilly coming down through Grove Street, Brook Street, and in the middle of downtown Darien. A lot of businesses affected here. The green areas, Kelsey, Moore, Catherine, a little more significant, a lot going on. There might be that DOT, Metro North. Again, one thing that, when I spoke earlier about why is Darien so affected on Long Island Sound, but the other factor which we discussed, I-95 goes through it, railroad, and I think Kip, you mentioned it last time. So those are places where water needs to go underneath those things that not every town has both of those in them. So you have these constraints with, and they're throughout town. Here's one here. There's others that we talk about, Good Wives and Tokenique, where it's going under the railroad. More constraints, more potential for problems. So what we wanted to do, and Ed, stop me if I'm wrong, is try to take a look at areas that we can, I hate to use the word fix. Fix is not the right word. Minimize.
Impact?
Minimize the impacts.
Yes.
So properties that are in the flood zone, floodway, little bigger problem.
No, I can appreciate that, and there's definitely a lot of areas that you've brought up on the map that are not affected by railroads or highways. And so we need to understand why.
But
Right.
I think the point about the railroads and the highway is that they are effectively rather large dams.
Of course.
That
Yeah.
go all the way across town, so, neighborhoods might not be near it, but it's stopping the flow, the natural flow of the water.
Right. And as Ed said, I've spoken to a number of people, we've spoken to a number of people that say, well, just put a bigger pipe in. We say, we have to understand how that might impact people downstream, because the last thing we want to do is just move a problem. No, it used to be here, now it's here, and now it's no, we need to figure out what is going to minimize the problem.
We can create new floodways. I'm being very sarcastic, and I apologize. I'm understanding that the problem would move. Yes.
Yes, so it's a multi-tiered problem.
Yes.
It's caused by culverts, it's caused by, I'll call it the damming effect of the railroad, I-95, low-lying areas, high water tables.
Big storms.
Big storms, thank you, that was another factor.
Jeremy, the zoning regulations that you mentioned that have changed, are those state-driven or are they local-driven?
They are driven locally. So the stormwater management regulations, I spoke to an engineer from Ty and Bond, and I said, do we have the most stringent stormwater management regulations in Fairfield County? He said, yes. There's one other town, think he said it's Stratford or Trumbull, that might be close. But what we require developers to do is more stringent than any other community in Fairfield County, maybe even the state, in terms of new development. And when the Planning and Zoning Commission looks at these developments, either because they're in the flood zone, or the EPC looks at them if they're near wetland, or if they're redeveloping a new house, doing a substantial addition, if you're, well, when you're familiar with what's going on at Federal Realty, et cetera, think of the most stringent stormwater management regulations in Fairfield County, maybe the state. So what my role is, planning and zoning, let's try to, again, minimize the problem going forward. Again, all this development occurred before these regulations. Let's, as we get the new wave of development, people's properties get redeveloped, let's try to hit that up front, see if we can reduce it for the next wave of development going forward.
So I guess the issue there is that the new development is the flea on the dog. You know, most of the property in town has been developed for long periods of time, and you can't go retroactively force homeowners to retrofit from the back.
Exactly. Homeowners are welcome to. We have had an occasional few property owners that have said, I want to put in a drainage system on my property. Help me out, tell me more, et cetera, et cetera. So there are people that do that for their own personal reasons. Is, hey, either I get water somewhere on my property I don't want it, whether that's in the yard or in the house or in the basement, whatever. And people do that, I don't want to say routinely, but occasionally, and that's always a help. Well, again, we're trying to chip away at the problem from many angles. Public works angle, a policy angle, and a redevelopment angle.
Jerry, our regulations are the strictest. Are we possibly being negatively impacted by our neighboring towns not having regulations that are as strict? And is there anything we could do to encourage them to come up to our standards?
I think what we'd have to do is, now certainly most communities around here they do look at drainage as part of their redevelopment. So every town does that in some way, shape, or form, whether it's the towns we're affected by really are Norwalk and New Canaan. Stamford, not really as much into the Road River, a little bit, but really the issues for us are New Canaan and Norwalk. I would say not to a great extent compared to the amount of the watersheds that are in Darien. There is some effect, but certainly I would say that might be one small piece of the puzzle, but it's not a big piece. But yes, that is one thing to consider.
Jeremy, does the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group to WestCog, still look at referrals for developments that are within a certain distance of borders, town borders?
That's correct. The state statute, I think it's 8-7, requires development within 500 feet of a municipal boundary to be referred to the Western Connecticut Council of Governments for comment. In most cases, the nature of the development is relatively minor. It's rare that you would see a large development on or near a property town boundary, but it does happen. WestCog's recent policy has been to issue no comment. We do get notice. One of the other state statutes is for development on municipal boundaries, whether it's Stamford, New Canaan, or Norwalk, they must notify the town clerk in Darien of such a development. So the town clerk and her staff downstairs will bring up such notices to our office so we can look at them and get a feel for, is this a big development going on in Stamford, or is this someone just renovating their house? So we get a sense of that. And there have been rare occasions where we'll bring it to the local planning and zoning commission here and say, do you have a comment on such a thing? So we do keep our eyes on that as well for development right near the municipal boundaries.
Thank you. Monica?
I have two questions. One is, on Parklands, this redevelopment, will they be required to take another look at their stormwater?
Yes, that's a good question. That's a great question. So let's take Parklands Office Park, which is this property right here. As you heard, there's a pending application to planning and zoning. There's 2 buildings on that property. Building 1 was redeveloped a few years ago from an office building to an assisted living facility. They put in a new drainage system as a result of that. That drainage system was designed by an engineer hired by the applicant and peer reviewed by an outside engineer at the applicant's expense. Similarly, with the pending application to turn the existing office building, Parklands Building 3, into a 60-unit apartment building. Again, the applicants hired an engineer to design a new stormwater management system, and the town has hired an outside engineer at the applicant's expense to peer review and check his work. So for example, in that case, the engineer said, oh, I see a pipe here needs to be moved, or is broken, or isn't big enough, or whatever it is. We're gonna put some new drainage underground bathtubs in to collect water. Here's how we're gonna feed it out. Our engineer has started reviewing that application, gotten feedback to the applicant's engineer on, yeah, check the elevation on this. You sure you wanna use this size pipe here? So again, there's I'll call it double engineering being done to make sure that whatever's built there, if anything, if it does pass, is done correctly. At the end of the project, if it is approved, just like with any other project, we would get the applicant's engineer to certify that everything was done properly in terms of whatever's installed for a drainage system. So that would be no different than Federal Realty, Roadways Shopping Center, the Corbin District. Any large development project would have that double engineering, if you will.
And do these projects, like, I feel like Federal, they went above and beyond.
They did.
Okay, so how do we encourage other developers to consider going above and beyond?
Certainly, and Ed, maybe you can chime in here, when they do the calculations in terms of how much water needs to be held back, think of these Cultec units, these big plastic tubs, if you will, to collect water underground. Let's say the calculation is to address the 50-year storm, you need 372 cubic feet of collection. Well, again, stop me if I'm wrong here, my basic engineer. The Cultec units come in 20s or 30s or 40s. So they're always going to be a little bit extra because you can't design to the exact number. You have to buy think of it as bathtubs only come in one size. So you have to buy that many bathtubs to hold the water, and that's always a little more than what the correct number is engineering is going to be. From a layman's standpoint, how's that sound? I think that's the explanation. So they're always going a little more.
So they're just rounding up.
They're rounding up.
Got it.
The Palmer's development, that was an excellent question that the Planning and Zoning Commission asked for Norotan Heights Shopping Center. And I'll mention this because you used the word above and beyond. The Norotan Heights Shopping Center, without going too far astray, if you think of, you have the Palmer development, the grocery store here, and then the rest of the shopping center buildings, the Southside Johnny's, or not Southside.
Jimmy Southside.
Thank you. Heights Pizza Building, all the way to Darien Donut. Well, when the engineers drilled down, they said only part of that property, that Palmer's Market property all the way to Hollow Tree, flows towards Vivalas. So what the Palmers did to go above and beyond, they put drainage in the back of their grocery store. They have employee parking right near Edgerton. That part of their property flows towards, I'll call it the low spot in Heights Road, which is near Vivalas. So they went above and beyond. They said, we'll put in an underground drainage system there to reduce, minimize, not eliminate, reduce or minimize the amount of water that flows towards Heights Road. The rest of the property, I'll call it Jimmy's, Donut, Heights Pizza, Fabric Hair, flows the other way to Hollow Tree. So there'll be a separate drainage system for that. But the Palmers said, look, we understand there's a sensitivity to that low spot in Heights Road. And they've implemented that piece of the puzzle, if you will.
In this new project?
before the new project was even done, but as part of it, yes.
Okay, so I thought the one under the employee, I thought it was only like 10,000 gallons.
I don't know the number of gallons.
Okay, okay.
Parklands 3 and Norotan Heights Shopping Center, the new development of Norotan Heights Shopping Center. Will they utilize the Fresh Meadow regulations?
Yes.
Okay, great.
So treat them like,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, well, you know, Kip, you can tell, you know, down to the penny how much you're spending on drainage.
A lot.
A lot of money to make sure you're not impacting people downstream.
Yep. Okay,
Can I have one more question for Wayne?
sure.
In the 2010 Flood Mitigation Strategy Committee report, the summary of the findings, one of their recommendations was to separate the flood and erosion control board from the environmental protection board. And unfortunately, in the summary, they don't provide a detailed rationale as to
Why they wanted to do it, yeah.
as to why. As a layperson, I would say to get more specific focus on the flood and erosion control function by separating it from the environmental protection. But with the new House bill that was passed, if it gets, what would be, well, I guess the question is, what would be involved in separating it? And if it becomes separated, does it then effectively fall under the Stormwater Authority regulation in terms of its powers?
I think, well, two things. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that one of the other factors considered was the expertise on that particular board, and whether they wanted a separate and distinct group of individuals to deal with those issues. That would be my hunch.
I think you're right. I'm sort of remembering that Craig made some allusion to that.
Yeah,
Skill set,
competition.
Yeah.
skill set
Exactly.
and expertise for the flood and erosion control is different than the environment, than the primary role for the environmental.
And I think by implication, if in fact a policy decision was made, rather than establishing a new board, we would meld it in with the existing board, then a determination would have to be made that there was in fact the expertise there to deal with those issues. If as a matter of policy, you folks or others didn't think that that was appropriate, then I would assume you would go a different way.
Any other questions? This is an excellent discussion. I want to thank all of you. Clearly, you have put a lot of thought and attention into some very specific recommendations, action items, studies that need to be done. I think this is a great path forward for the community. I strongly recommend that staff thinks about this policy issue of a stormwater authority versus an erosion control board, and what would be best suited for our community, and continue that dialogue with the next Board of Selectmen. And also, please come back to the Board of Selectmen for your funding needs. I think everybody's really eager to move these projects forward. I feel that the Board of Finance will very much support your efforts. And again, I want to thank you so much. I think this is, I hope this gives the community some confidence that a lot of hard work has been going on since these two storms this year. And we will continue to move forward very diligently to put things into action.
Could I ask to add one thing to that?
Yes.
Also from the 2010 subcommittee, there was an item, a recommendation from item in here to allocate additional staff or annually contract with consultant to fill multiple related floodplain management stormwater runoff roles. Ed, you are remarkable in terms of the amount of things that you have on your plate and the things that you manage, and I think the town is incredibly well served, and if anybody doesn't know it, they should be incredibly thankful. But I worry that you have so much on your plate that with the increasing focus on the flooding issues, that it sort of has you running in too many directions all at the same time. So I would ask you to consider the possibility of some additional specific resource to help you specifically with this area. I think there's a new appreciation for the level of problem that flooding is in our town. I know that Jamie has offered several times tomorrow to get him some additional help. So since it was one of the recommendations that was in this prior study, just think about it. Because, you know, I'm not gonna presume to, you know, surmise what it should be or what, but you might have some ideas, so let's consider that.
I think, David, that may be one additional factor that will be looked at and reviewed and considered in making the final determination.
Definitely, that sounds right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Great work.
Hey, are you okay, bud? You're welcome, we'll sit today. Did you get a chance to go over and walk salt box?
I did, with two of the neighbors over there.
Okay, so you saw the part where the drainage behind the homes basically hits a stone wall that takes a 90-degree turn to enter into the drain?
I did.
Okay.
I haven't analyzed that, that's one of the entrance points.
Well, I'm sure if you've seen it, then it's clearly on your radar.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Last meeting, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Okay, new business item, discuss and take action on a request to accept the donation of a vehicle to At Home in Darien. Kate, would you like to speak to this?
Well, we found out last week that the Darien Foundation had offered to donate a vehicle to replace an existing vehicle that At Home uses. Our relationship with At Home is that we do own the vehicle, and the drivers are actually on our roll. They reimburse us for the cost of maintaining the vehicle and paying the drivers. But for insurance purposes, the vehicle is a town-owned vehicle, which means we have to accept the donation. And the leaders of the RTM have been so kind as to put it on their rules agenda for tonight, so they've probably already, you know, bumped this out, and they're going to consider it. I believe they're going to consider it at their November meeting, so that this can move along quickly.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you.
The other question I have, is this a new vehicle?
It will be a new vehicle, yes,
Thank you.
but it's replacing,
Got it.
you know, so new to us, but it's replacing what we have now.
Yeah.
Well, so there's that, but I wonder, like,
Well, it's
do you have
equipped to-
expenses, like, you know, if this is.
This
a
is
used one
equipped
or-
to, for wheelchairs
Yeah.
and stuff.
Perfect, thank you.
So definitely want to acknowledge the Darien Foundation's generous donation. At Home in Darien is an exceptional agency that really does a great job assisting our seniors to live well at home. So if there are no further questions, I will, with your permission, waiving the reading of this resolution, entertain a motion to approve resolution authorizing the acceptance of a gift to At Home in Darien and the town of Darien for $82,880 from the Darien Foundation. Sarah moves, may I have a second? I saw David's hand. David seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Terrific. Okay, thank you very much. Appointments. We have one appointment this evening of Byrne Posey to the Human Service Commission for a term expiring on November 30th, 2024. Motion.
So moved.
Kip moves. May I have a second?
Second.
Oh, gosh.
All
I
hands.
heard, I saw.
Everybody
I'm
said
gonna give
it
it to
at the same
Monica.
time, so whoever.
Okay, Monica seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Byrne. We have regular meeting minutes of our October 19th meeting. Any corrections or additions? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented. Sarah moves. May I have a second?
Second.
Kip seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Kate, is there any public comment for this evening?
No.
No public comment. Okay, agenda review. I'm going to assume there's none.
There is not, we would like
I'm not
to.
gonna be here. Could I make a couple other, since I'm not gonna be here going forward?
Yes,
can
I think
make
a few of us want to have a point of personal privilege, that's what that
Okay,
would be called right now.
so whatever's the right time for that.
Yes. Absolutely, David, go right ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to tag on specifically around the flooding stuff, because I had tried to read everything I could find around that. And it strikes me that as a layperson, when I read through everything, right, some of the properties in town are in areas that are frequently flooded, and they aside from the hardship on the families, right, it can pose an increasing risk of life to either the first responders or the people that live there, right? And I am hoping that the next Board of Selectmen will consider establishing the property acquisition fund, or reestablishing, finding a mechanism to refund it. That's one of the things that was recommended in the Flood Mitigation Committee from 2010, and it's actually listed on page 52 of the Town Plan of Conservation and Development. So, unfortunately, there are some properties that there's not enough remediation that's going to ever be able to be done to eliminate the flooding risk. So it feels to me like the right thing to say, when and if certain properties become available, it'd be a good idea to let's just not have a building in that location anymore. So I hope the board will consider that. And after all the discussion about the separation, when I came here, I was set that I knew the right answer, and after all the discussion about the folding, I didn't realize that we could fold the powers into the existing EPC. But it strikes me that the concept that the skill set for the Flood and Erosion Control Board is different than the EPC.
Mhm.
Finding some way to separate them, whether it be a stormwater authority or just separate them so we can have populate with different people, seems like a good idea. Because it seems like the frequency and severity of the flooding events is here to stay, right? It's rising. And having a group that's dedicated solely to that issue, I think would be beneficial. The exact mechanism, structure, funding, those types of things, I'm gonna leave it to you guys. But intuitively from my reading, that was my sort of takeaway.
Well, David, to that, I think what Craig was saying was, first it's a volunteer, do we have enough volunteers? But the other concept was that you want those two boards working together, not working towards separate goals, which would be detrimental to one or the other.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah.
keeping them under one umbrella would kind of force the decisions to be made in the best interest of both groups. I think that's what Craig's, that's where he was coming from.
Okay.
Good point.
Well, it's obviously gonna reside with you guys, so
Okay.
I know it's in good hands.
Thank you, David. Sarah?
So at a minimum, this room will look very different at our next meeting on November 8th. And so we'd like to do some thank yous for some of the individuals that are leaving this room and will not be returning. First, I would like to thank David Martin. David, I've greatly enjoyed working with you over the past couple of years. Incredible attention to detail, thoughtful analysis, and follow-through have made you an asset to this board. I'm so grateful that you will be joining the Board of Finance. Thank you for your service that you've given to the town of Darien. On behalf of the Board of Selectmen, thank you for your service. So I think we have, yep. So thank you.
Aw.
Yep, and mine's coming. So we're getting it here.
Very fun. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Kip, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you in the past couple of years. Your incredible leadership with the Oxford Elementary School building project has been a labor of love on your behalf. I know you have spent an inordinate amount of time on it. You have been able to get this project done on time and under budget. Through your service, building has been a theme. We also thank you for your leadership with the town garage building project also. On behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I'd like to thank you for your years of service to the town of Darien.
Thank you. As a resident, I'd just like to say thank you because your contributions with the Oxford School is leaving a legacy for the town, and it's a tremendous gift for every every resident in this town. Listen,
All
even if
sides
there
want
even if there are
positive.
problems that arise later, the project has been managed exceptionally well.
Yes, it has.
And it's a tremendous gift to
Thank
everyone
you.
in this town.
Well, that's- To my team, that's the group who really did it.
They're phenomenal. Thank you. And Jamie, last but not least. I'd like to thank Jamie Stevenson for her decade of service as Darien's first selectman. The role you have is not a 9-to-5 job. There's no off switch. It's evenings and weekends and everything in between. And I know your family has also made sacrifices. The first selectman role is not limited to your office here at Town Hall. It's leadership roles around the state, such as in Westcog. It's surveying damage in the middle of a hurricane and working to get power back to our residents very quickly. It would certainly be very hard to summarize in a few words all that you have done for Darien over the past 10 years. I know you are looking forward to spending more time with your entire family, from your husband, children, grandchildren, and your beloved pets. So Jamie, on behalf of the Board of Selectmen, thank you very much for your years of service to the town.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Monica.
Thanks so much. Thank you. It's
Thank
very
you.
nice. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Kip, I think you wanted to make a few comments.
Well, this will be different. So, a little more than 6 years ago, I raised my hand reluctantly to become a candidate for the Board of Selectmen. This was my first adventure into Darien government since I moved here in 1944. And I was surprised as anyone that I want a seat on the board. Fast forward 6 years later, what have I learned? The most important takeaway is that Darien is and has been for quite some time an extremely well-managed town. Excellence is the proper term that can describe many of our town's activities, whether it be fiscal management, education, emergency services, parks and beaches, or health and youth services. This excellence has 3 sources, in my opinion. First, great professional managers and support staffs that innovate and focus on delivering valuable services to our citizens and businesses. In my opinion, this is the secret strength of Darien. Number 2, capable and dedicated leaders of commissions, committees, and advisory groups. Here we are, who are almost all unpaid and put in hours of their time to serve the town with remarkably positive results. A small example would be Jim Cameron and his team at Channel 79, who have created the capability to view all committee meetings via live and or recorded telecast. No town even comes close to that capability. The third and the last of these 3 sources is a strong tradition of volunteerism that goes well beyond the government groups I just cited. This long-standing tradition is found everywhere in Darien, and we're all better off for it. The second takeaway is that as the issues enveloping our town have become more complex and potentially divisive, the initiative of Jamie Stevenson to expand the role of First Selectman to include regional and statewide concerns with active participation in leadership positions in such organizations has been a critical step in trying to maintain local control. A third takeaway is a much clearer understanding of the objectives, goals, and tactics of the ruling body in Hartford to exercise control over Darien's affairs through unfunded mandates and push for regionalism, as well as taxing and funding policies that always ask for more from our taxpayers. The past 6 years have been a very gratifying experience because of the people that I have met and worked with. The Oxford's Building Committee is a perfect example. There are many more. I leave you with 3 quotes which I believe are applicable to our times. From Pericles in 430 BC, he said, "Just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you." From Plato, "If you do not take an interest in the affairs of your government, then you are doomed to live under the rule of fools." And finally, from Mark Twain in 1886, "No man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the legislature is in session." Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kip. I always love your wisdom and especially love your quotes. So for me, I'll try not to cry through this. I'm really not good with goodbyes. While we may need to hold a very brief virtual meeting to handle a few pieces of business for this board, This will be my last Board of Selectmen meeting after 12 years serving you as first selectman on the board, serving as a selectman on the board from 2009 to 2011, and then 10 years as your first selectman. It's been a privilege of a lifetime to lead our team of town officials, volunteers, and staff. I can't look at you, Kate, because then I'll cry. Through so many good times, but most important, through the tough times. A global pandemic and damaging storms over the years have certainly tested us. Our resilience comes from us coming together with empathy and compassion to support one another. The fabric of our Darien community has always been our strength. There are things happening in our community right now that are shaking our foundation. I've asked for the help of our faith communities to help guide us through. This will be the first and most important task of our new town leadership. I've always felt that the role of first selectman or mayor in any town was to provide a continuum of thoughtful, focused leadership, bringing from one administration to the next in the future. A borrowed privilege bestowed upon elected leaders by trusting voters who entered into a social contract with us to be their advocate and their voice, never to be taken for granted or used for personal gain. For 12 years, it's been my sacred responsibility to put the well-being of our town first. We've done so many great things together, but there's always more to do, and I'm going to leave a list. Nothing would be possible without our talented, dedicated staff to whom I'm eternally grateful. Kip, you've been a fantastic board partner and friend. Your contributions to our community are significant and lasting. I'm so grateful for all the time and talents of all of you and the work that we've done together. Sarah, Monica, David, best wishes to all of you on November 2nd. No matter the outcome, protecting, preserving, and supporting our town remains the mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Sarah moves. Monica seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. David, you have one more thing beside your.
Oh, I missed one?
Yeah, just was a little slender thing in the back.